Margarete Schmidt stood in what remained of her kitchen. 3 walls, no roof, a single intact shelf where it sat like an accusation. American spam. Pink, processed, wrapped in a label she couldn't read. It had been there for 3 weeks. Unopened, untouched. Outside, snow began to fall through the hole where her ceiling used to be, dusting the debris that had once been her dining room. Her daughter Latte slept in the corner, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too large, her 7-year-old face hollow and gray. Margarete hadn't eaten in 3 days. Dickens sat there, mocking her. We would rather starve than eat pig meat from a tin like animals, her neighbor Frau Weber had said when the Americans first distributed the rations. The other women nodded. They were German hausfraus. They knew how to cook properly, with fresh ingredients, with dignity. This was food for soldiers, for people without culture, for the Americans who had bombed their cities into dust, that can remain sealed, a monument to everything they refused to surrender. But winter was coming, and hunger, Margarete was learning, has no allegiance to pride. Before the war ended, the German kitchen was sacred territory. The Hausfrau, the homemaker, held a position of profound respect. She was a nourisher, the preserver of tradition, the guardian of family culture. German cooking meant fresh bread from the bakery, vegetables from the market, meat from the butcher who knew your family by name. Meals were prepared with care, served with ritual and eaten together. That world ended on May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered. Its infrastructure lay in ruins. Railways destroyed. Roads are impassable. Factories obliterated. The supply chains that fed 70 million people simply ceased to exist. In the major cities, Hamburg, Berlin, Munich, Dresden, whole neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble by Allied bombing campaigns. Millions of refugees flooded westward, fleeing the Soviet advance, adding to the chaos. The numbers tell a brutal story. In 1939, the average German consumed roughly 2,500 calories per day. By August 1945, in the British and American occupation zones, daily rations had dropped to 800 calories, a slow starvation diet. In the Soviet zone, it was often less. The Allies, to their credit, recognized the crisis. Care packages began arriving. Military rations were distributed, and among those rations, 12 million cans of Spam, the processed pork product that had kept American soldiers fed throughout the war. It should have been a salvation. Instead, it became a cultural battlefield. American processed food represented everything that offended German sensibilities. It came from a can. No Hausfrau worthy of the name served food from a can. It was pre-cooked, where was the skill, the artistry, the care in that? It was made from mystery meat, pork shoulders and ham processed beyond recognition, suspended in gelatin, more industrial product than food. A U.S. Army report from September 1945 noted with frustration, German civilians in the western sectors refuse American rations despite critical food shortage. They claim the food is unfit for human consumption and prefer to forage or go hungry. In distribution centers across occupied Germany, cans of Spam piled up, unopened, unwanted, while outside people starved. The collision between American abundance and German devastation, between processed convenience and culinary tradition, had created a standoff, and that standoff was about to turn deadly. Margarete Schmidt wasn't alone in her refusal. Across Germany's bombed-out cities, women faced the same choice and made the same decision. In Hamburg, Anna Becker, 38, spent her days as one of the Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women, clearing debris from destroyed buildings, backbreaking labor for minimal rations. She returned each night to a basement apartment she shared with her mother-in-law and 3 children. A can of Spam sat on their makeshift shelf. She wouldn't touch it. "We are not beggars," she told her children when they asked about the strange American food. "We will find proper food." But proper food was increasingly impossible to find. Anna spent her Sundays foraging in the countryside, searching for nettles, wild mushrooms, anything edible. She bartered her mother's silver candlesticks for a loaf of black bread that was more sawdust than grain. She stood in ration lines for 4 hours to receive a handful of potatoes. In Munich, 29-year-old Helga Muller watched her 6-year-old son Carl grow thinner each week. His eyes seemed too large for his face. His belly, paradoxically, was swollen, a sign of severe malnutrition. He cried from hunger pains at night. Helga had a can of Spam. She'd hidden it behind a loose brick in their damaged apartment, ashamed even to have it in her home. She couldn't bring herself to open it. What would her mother think? What would her neighbors say? That she'd surrendered to the Americans? That she'd given up her German identity for processed foreign garbage? The summer of 1945 dragged into autumn. The situation worsened. In July, Margaretti's daughter Lotte fainted in the street while playing, her body too weak to sustain even gentle activity. Anna's mother-in-law developed pneumonia, her immune system too compromised by hunger to fight the infection. She died in September. Helga caught Carl stealing scraps from American military garbage bins, a humiliation that made her weep. And still, the can sat unopened. Margaretti wrote in her diary in July, "The Americans think we should be grateful. They do not understand we still have our dignity. We may have lost a war, but we have not lost who we are. But dignity doesn't fill an empty stomach, and identity doesn't warm a child on a cold night." As October turned to November, and November threatened December, the truly dangerous season approached, the hunger winter of 1945 to 46, and the temperature began to drop. December 17th, 1945, the day everything changed. Winter had arrived with vengeance. Temperatures in Berlin plummeted to minus 20 degrees Celsius. What little infrastructure remained couldn't provide heat. Windows, already shattered by bombs, let in Arctic winds. Families burned furniture, books, anything combustible just to survive the night. And the food situation, already desperate, became catastrophic. Allied supply chains, stretched thin across a devastated continent, couldn't keep pace with demand. Rations were cut again. The 800 calories that had barely sustained life dropped to 600, then 500. People began to die, not from bombs or bullets, but from hunger. The old went first, then the very young. Margaretti Schmidt's daughter Lotte collapsed that Tuesday morning. Not dramatically. She simply stopped moving, her small body giving up its fight. Margaretti found her in the corner where she'd been playing with a doll made from rags, unconscious, her breathing shallow. The hospital, what remained of it, operated from a partially destroyed school building. The doctor, exhausted and overwhelmed, examined Lotte for less than 5 minutes. Severe malnutrition, protein deficiency. Her organs are beginning to fail. He looked at Margaretti with eyes that had seen too much death. Feed her protein. Real protein. Meat, eggs, milk, or she will die within a week. "I have no meat," Margaretti whispered. "No eggs. No milk." "Then find some, or start planning her funeral." Margaretti walked home through streets white with snow and gray with ash. Her mind was numb. Lotte would die. Her daughter would die, because Margaretti was too proud to open a can. She entered what remained of their apartment. The temperature inside was barely warmer than outside, and there, on that single intact shelf, sat the can of Spam, waiting, patient, inevitable. Her hands shook as she reached for it. This moment, this simple act of opening a can, felt like the final surrender, worse than the military defeat, worse than the occupation. This was admitting that everything she believed about who she was, who Germans were, had been reduced to this. Opening processed meat from an American tin because she had no other choice. She tried to pry it open with a knife. The blade slipped. She cut her finger. Blood dripped onto the can's label. American blood on American food. The metaphor was too obvious, too cruel. She wiped the blood away and tried again. This time, the can opened. The smell hit her, metallic, salty, foreign. The meat inside was pink and gelatinous, nothing like any food she'd ever prepared. It looked obscene. Margaretti carried a can to their makeshift stove, a metal drum with a fire of broken furniture inside. She had a few potatoes left, shriveled and sprouting. She cut the Spam into pieces, fried it with the potatoes, and carried a plate to where Lotte lay. "Eat," she whispered to her sleeping daughter. "Please, just eat. Later, She would write in her diary, "I opened a can and wept, not from gratitude, but from the death of who we were." But Latte ate, and she survived. The news spread like wildfire through the ruined neighborhoods. 3 days later, December 20th, Anna Becker in Hamburg made the same choice. Her youngest son had stopped crying from hunger, and that silence, she realized, was worse than the crying. Silence meant giving up. She opened her can. On Christmas Eve, Helga Muller in Munich broke. She couldn't bear seeing Karl's face another Christmas morning. Couldn't endure his hope that maybe this year, maybe this time, there would be food. She cooked her family's spam with the last onion she'd been saving, trying desperately to make it taste German, to reclaim some dignity in the act of surrender. By January 1946, the psychological dam had broken. Women throughout the Western occupation zones began opening their cans. Word spread. The food was edible. It wasn't good, but it was protein. It kept children alive. It kept families from freezing and starving simultaneously. Statistics capture the shift. In August 1945, less than 10% of distributed spam was consumed. By February 1946, that number reached 70%. Death rates from starvation, which had been climbing steadily through the autumn, began to decline. Latte Schmidt gained weight. Anna's children's energy returned. Karl Muller's belly stopped swelling. His eyes brightened, but the emotional cost persisted. Shame lingered like the smell of processed meat. Women felt they betrayed something fundamental, their culture, their identity, their worth as homemakers. They'd become, in their own minds, what the Nazis had always claimed the Americans were: culturally inferior, willing to eat anything, lacking sophistication. So they adapted, they improvised, they fought back the only way they knew how, through cooking. German Hausfraus began developing recipes to disguise spam's taste. They mixed it with sauerkraut, fried it with cabbage and caraway seeds, created Dosenfleisch dishes, and incorporated the canned meat into traditional German flavor profiles. If they couldn't reject the food, they would at least make it German. At a women's group meeting in February 1946, one elderly Hausfrau summarized the transformation: "We eat to live, but we cook to remember who we were." The cans that had symbolized defeat were slowly being transformed into symbols of resilience. Not acceptance, resilience, a crucial difference. The historical significance of this moment extends far beyond nutrition. Between 1945 and 1947, American food aid, including those millions of cans of spam, prevented the starvation deaths of an estimated 3 to 5 million Germans. The Marshall Plan that followed built on this foundation, but it was those first cans, opened reluctantly in frozen apartments, that kept Germany alive long enough to be rebuilt. But the deeper transformation was psychological. The moment German women chose survival over ideology, pragmatism over pride, marked a fundamental shift. That generation, the women who'd open American cans while weeping, became the foundation of West Germany's economic miracle. They'd learned a harsh lesson. Flexibility matters more than tradition when survival is at stake. Modern Germany's embrace of international cuisine, its openness to cultural exchange, has roots partly in this moment. The rigidity that characterized pre-war German identity couldn't survive the post-war reality. Historians mark this as significant. The day German women opened American cans was the day the war truly ended, not in treaties or occupations, but in their kitchens, in their hearts, in the quiet admission that life mattered more than pride. In a German museum today, an empty spam can sit in a display case. The label reads, "Survival 1945." A monument to the moment hunger defeated ideology and life defeated pride. Sometimes surrender is the bravest choice. Sometimes opening it can mean opening a future.